The bruise on Clara Cole's cheekbone had turned a sickly yellow-green by the time she stumbled into Riverton, Wyoming, with nothing but the threadbare dress on her back and $3 sewn into the hem. She had learned young that men's voices were weapons, their words sharper than any blade, and their fists quicker than rattlesnakes when the whiskey flowed too freely in the evening hours. It was late September 1876, and the autumn wind carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains as Clara walked down the dusty main street, her boots worn through at the soles. She had walked for 3 days after jumping from the supply wagon that belonged to her stepfather's trading partner, preferring the wilderness to one more night under that roof where every man who passed through felt entitled to comment on her appearance, her worth, her very existence in language that made her skin crawl. The town of Riverton sat in a valley where the Popo Ag River wound through grasslands before the ground rose toward the Wind River Range. It was a settlement of maybe 200 souls, built around the lumber trade and the handful of ranches that dotted the surrounding territory. Clara had chosen it because it was far enough from Denver that nobody would know her stepfather's name, small enough that perhaps someone might need a woman willing to work for room and board. The general store was the largest building on the street, 2 stories of weathered wood with a false front that made it look grander than it was. Clara pushed through the door, making the bell jingle, and found herself face to face with a woman of perhaps 50 years whose expression shifted from welcoming to wary in the space of a heartbeat. "We don't give handouts," the woman said, her voice clipped and cold. Clara straightened her spine despite the exhaustion that made her bones ache. "I'm not asking for charity, madam. I'm looking for work. I can clean, cook, mend, keep accounts if needed. I can read and write and cipher." The woman's eyes narrowed as they traveled over Clara's bruised face, her tangled brown hair, the way her dress hung loose where it had once fit properly before weeks of eating too little. "What are you running from?" "Nothing that followed me here," Clara said, which was true enough. She had covered her tracks carefully, and her stepfather would be more concerned with explaining to his wife where Clara had gone than actually searching for her. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. My husband runs this store." The woman crossed her arms. "We don't need help." Clara nodded once, turned to leave, and felt the world tilt sideways as the 3 days of walking and 1 day of not eating at all caught up with her. She caught herself on the doorframe, breathing hard. "When did you last eat?" Mrs. Patterson's voice had shifted, not warm but less hostile. "I had some berries yesterday morning." "For the love of heaven." Mrs. Patterson sighed the way women do when faced with a problem they had not asked for but could not ignore. "Come to the back. I'll give you something, but then you need to move along. My husband won't tolerate vagrants." Clara followed her through a doorway behind the counter into a small room that served as both storage and living space. Mrs. Patterson cut 2 thick slices of bread, spread them with butter, and handed them over with a cup of water. Clara ate slowly, making herself chew properly even though her stomach screamed for her to devour everything at once. "There's a woman named Mrs. Henley who runs a boarding house on the north end of town," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone suggesting this was charity enough. "She might need help with the cooking and cleaning. Tell her I sent you." "Thank you." Clara finished the bread and water, set the cup down carefully. "I appreciate your kindness, Mrs." Patterson made a dismissive sound. "Just don't make me regret it, and girl, whatever man did that to your face, you were right to run." Clara said nothing. There had been several men over the years since her mother died and left her in her stepfather's care. Their words had always come before their fists, testing to see how much she would tolerate, how small she would make herself. She had learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to absorb their venom like a stone absorbs rain. But something had finally broken in her 3 weeks ago, when her stepfather's business partner had put his hand on her arm and told her she should be grateful for male attention, that a woman with her plain face could not afford to be particular. She had left that night. The boarding house was exactly where Mrs. Patterson had indicated, a large structure that might have been a fine home once, but now showed signs of hard use and practical modifications. Clara knocked on the front door and waited, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers. The woman who answered was tall and raw-boned, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Yes, Mrs. Henley? My name is Clara Cole. Mrs. Patterson from the general store suggested you might need help. I can work in exchange for room and board." Mrs. Henley looked her over with the thoroughness of someone evaluating livestock. "You run from the law?" "No, madam." "From a husband?" "I've never been married." "From family, then." It was not a question. Mrs. Henley stepped back. "Come in. I'll not have you collapsing on my porch." The interior was clean but worn, furnished with mismatched chairs and tables that spoke of years of use by transient guests. Mrs. Henley led Clara to the kitchen, a large room dominated by a cast-iron stove and a work table that could seat 10. "I have 6 rooms I rent to working men," Mrs. Henley said without preamble. "They expect 3 meals a day, breakfast at 6, midday meal at noon, supper at 6 in the evening. I do the cooking, but I need someone to help with the preparation, serve the meals, clean up after, and keep the rooms in order. I'll provide a room in the attic, 3 meals, and $2 a month. You steal from me or cause trouble with my boarders, and you'll be out on your ear." "Understood?" "Yes, madam." $2 a month was not much, but it was honest work, and the room and meals were worth more than gold at the moment. "You can start now. There's a basin upstairs where you can wash, and I'll find you a clean dress. You'll help me prepare supper." Mrs. Henley's expression softened slightly. "What happened to your face is your business. But if whoever did it comes looking for you here, I expect you to tell me straight so I can be prepared." "He won't come," Clara said with certainty. "I'm not worth the trouble to him." Mrs. Henley nodded slowly. "Then we'll say no more about it. Welcome to Riverton, Miss Cole." The work was hard but steady, and Clara fell into the rhythm of it with the relief of someone who had found harbor after a storm. She woke before dawn to help Mrs. Henley prepare breakfast for the boarders, 6 men who worked at the lumber mill or on the surrounding ranches. They were rough in their manners, loud in their speech, but Mrs. Henley ran a tight establishment and tolerated no disrespect toward Clara or herself. Still, Clara heard the way they talked when they thought she was not listening. Crude jokes, casual cruelty about women they had known. Assessments of Clara's appearance that made her stomach turn even though she kept her face carefully blank. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. One of the boarders, a man named Samuel who worked as a ranch hand, seemed to think her silence was invitation. He started finding excuses to be in the kitchen when she worked, standing too close, letting his hand brush against hers when she served his plate. "You're a quiet one," he said one evening, his breath sour with tobacco. "I like that in a woman. Shows you know your place." Clara said nothing, just moved to the other side of the table to gather dishes. "Don't be unfriendly now," Samuel continued, his voice taking on an edge. "A woman in your position should be grateful for attention from a working man with steady wages." The words were an echo of what she had heard before, and something cold settled in Clara's chest. She picked up the dishes and carried them to the sink, her movements mechanical. "You too good to talk to me?" Samuel stood, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "That what you think? You're nothing but a charity case, girl. You ought to Mr. Samuel." Mrs. Henley's voice cut through the kitchen like a knife. She stood in the doorway, her expression hard as flint. "Miss Cole is my employee, not your entertainment. You'll treat her with respect or find other lodging. Am I clear?" Samuel's face flushed, but he nodded and left the kitchen, his boots heavy on the stairs. Mrs. Henley waited until his door slammed before speaking. "Don't let men like that make you feel small, Clara. He's a bully, and bullies are cowards at heart." But Clara had heard such words before, and she knew that cowards could still hurt you if you gave them the chance. She kept her head down, did her work, and tried to make herself invisible. 3 weeks after her arrival in Riverton, the pattern of her new life was interrupted by the appearance of a man unlike any of the rough workers who usually frequented Mrs. Henley's establishment. Clara was scrubbing the front steps in the late afternoon when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She looked up and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man who rode into the yard was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. He wore buckskin and wool, clothes that had seen hard use but were well maintained, and his arms, where they showed beneath rolled sleeves, were corded with muscle that spoke of a life spent in physical labor. But it was his face that held Clara's attention. Strong features weathered by sun and wind, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and eyes of such a clear gray that they seemed to look straight through her. He dismounted with the ease of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot, and when he approached the steps, Clara scrambled to move out of his way, keeping her eyes down. "Madam," he said, and his voice was a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "I'm looking for Mrs. Henley. I was told she has rooms to let." Clara risked a glance up and found him looking at her with an expression that was merely polite, patient, waiting for an answer. There was no assessment in his gaze, no calculation. He looked at her the way he might look at any human being performing a task. "I'll fetch her for you, sir," Clara said quietly. "I'd appreciate that." He stepped back to give her room to stand, and Clara noticed that despite his size he moved carefully, making himself smaller somehow so as not to loom over her. She found Mrs. Henley in the kitchen and delivered the message, then returned to her scrubbing. working on the side of the steps farthest from where the stranger stood waiting with his horse. Mrs. Henley emerged a moment later. "You must be Josiah Lawson. I got your letter last week." "Yes, madam. I apologize for arriving later than expected. The weather in the high country has been unpredictable." "You're a trapper," your letter said. Mrs. Henley looked him over with her usual thoroughness. "Yes, madam. I work the mountains through the winter, but I come down to resupply and sell my furs. I was hoping to rent a room for 3 or 4 weeks while I prepare for the season. I have a room available. 3 meals a day, laundering once a week. I run a respectable house, Mr. Lawson. No drinking, no carousing, no impropriety." "That suits me fine, madam. I'm a quiet man." $2 a week, paid in advance. Josiah Lawson reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch, counting coins into Mrs. Henley's hand. Clara watched from the corner of her eye as his large fingers handled the money with surprising delicacy. "Supper is at 6, Mrs. Henley said. "Miss Cole here will show you to your room. It's the one at the end of the hall upstairs." Clara's hands stilled on the scrub brush. She had not expected to be called into the conversation, had been doing her best to finish her task and disappear as quickly as possible. "Clara, leave that for now and help Mr. Lawson with his things," Mrs. Henley continued. Clara stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and moved toward the door. Josiah Lawson gathered his saddlebags and a large pack from his horse, moving to follow her. Inside, Clara led the way up the stairs, conscious of the heavy tread behind her. The room at the end of the hall was the largest, with a decent bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "This is your room, sir," Clara said, still not quite meeting his eyes. "If you need anything, Mrs. Henley or I can help you." "Thank you, madam." His voice was so gentle it made something twist in Clara's chest. She had grown accustomed to men who barked their words like orders or sneered them like insults. This quiet courtesy was so unexpected it left her off balance. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss, I don't mean to trouble you, but could you tell me where I might find the blacksmith? I need some work done on my traps." Clara finally looked directly at him and found him standing by the window, his large frame somehow non-threatening despite his size. "The smithy is 2 streets over, next to the livery. His name is Mr. Garrett. I appreciate it," he smiled. Just a slight curve of his mouth, and Clara felt her face flush for reasons she could not quite name. She fled the room before she could embarrass herself further. That evening at supper, Clara served the meal with her usual efficiency, filling plates with Mrs. Henley's beef stew and fresh bread. The other boarders ate with their customary noise, talking over each other about the day's work, complaining about the foreman at the mill, speculating about whether the winter would come early. Josiah Lawson sat at the end of the table, eating quietly and listening without joining the conversation. Clara noticed that he ate with obvious appreciation for the food, but without the sloppy manners some of the other men displayed. When she came to refill his coffee, he looked up and said, "Thank you, Miss Cole. This is the best meal I've had in months." The words were simple, without the oily charm some men used when they wanted something. Clara nodded and moved on, but she felt something warm settle behind her ribs. Samuel, who had been watching this exchange, chose that moment to speak up. "Lawson, you trying to butter up the help? She's not much to look at, but I suppose after months in the mountains a man gets desperate." The table went quiet. Clara froze with the coffee pot in her hand, feeling her face burn with humiliation and rage she could not express. Josiah Lawson set down his fork with careful precision. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet, but there was something in it that made every man at the table sit up straighter. "Mr. Samuel, I'm going to assume you just forgot your manners. Miss Cole has done nothing to deserve disrespect, and I'll ask you to keep your observations to yourself." "I was just making a joke," Samuel blustered, but his face had paled slightly. "It was not funny." Josiah returned to his meal as if the matter was settled. Samuel opened his mouth to retort, then seemed to think better of it. The other men shifted uncomfortably and began talking about other things. Clara finished serving coffee and retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking. Mrs. Henley, who had witnessed the exchange, gave her a meaningful look but said nothing. Later, as Clara was washing dishes, Mrs. Henley spoke. "That Mr. Lawson is a different sort, I think." "He didn't have to say anything," Clara said quietly. "No, he didn't, but he did anyway." Mrs. Henley dried a plate thoughtfully. "There are men who use their strength to take what they want, and men who use it to protect what's right. I've been running this house for 15 years, Clara, and I've gotten good at telling the difference." Clara said nothing, but she thought about Josiah Lawson's quiet voice, the way he had made Samuel back down without raising his voice or making threats. She had never seen a man do such a thing before. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn as usual to help prepare breakfast. She was mixing batter for flapjacks when she heard footsteps on the back stairs. Josiah Lawson appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, dressed for the outdoors. "I apologize for the early intrusion, Miss Cole. I need to head up to the trading post before the day gets away from me. Would it be possible to get a cup of coffee before I go?" Clara glanced at Mrs. Henley, who nodded. "Of course, sir. Please sit down. I can make you something to eat as well if you'd like." "Coffee is all I need, thank you." He sat at the kitchen table, which suddenly seemed smaller with his large frame occupying it. Clara poured coffee into a tin cup and set it before him, along with the sugar bowl and a small pitcher of cream. He wrapped his hands around the cup, and Clara noticed old scars on his knuckles, the kind that came from hard work and harder winters. "I wanted to thank you," Clara said suddenly, the words escaping before she could think better of them. "For what you said last night. You didn't have to, and I'm grateful." Josiah looked at her with those clear gray eyes, and his expression was troubled. "Miss Cole, you don't need to thank me for common decency. That man was out of line. Most men wouldn't have noticed," Clara said, then realized how bitter she sounded and turned back to her mixing bowl. There was a long silence. Then Josiah said very gently, "Then you've known the wrong sort of men." The words, spoken with such simple conviction, made Clara's eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. She kept her back to him, stirring the batter with fierce concentration. "I should let you work," Josiah said, standing. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Cole." He left through the back door, and Clara stood at the counter, breathing hard, trying to understand why kindness made her want to weep when cruelty had only made her angry. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Josiah Lawson was gone most of each day, conducting his business in town and in the surrounding area. But he was present for meals, and Clara found herself acutely aware of his presence at the table. He never spoke much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and considerate. He asked Mrs. Henley about her recipe for cornbread. He inquired after the health of another boarder who had been suffering from a cough. He noticed when Clara had mended a tear in the tablecloth and commented that it was fine work. Small things, ordinary things. But to Clara, who had spent her life navigating around men's anger and contempt, these moments of quiet regard felt revolutionary. Samuel continued to make his snide comments when Josiah was not around, but Clara found they had less power now. She had seen that not all men spoke with cruelty, and that knowledge was a shield against the venom she had thought was simply the nature of things. One afternoon, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when Josiah returned from town with a string of packages. He dismounted and nodded to her in greeting, then paused. "Miss Cole, I bought some supplies at the general store, and Mrs. Patterson insisted on including these." He pulled a small paper-wrapped parcel from his saddlebag. "She said they were for you. Something about your hands." Clara took the parcel, confused, and opened it to find a tin of salve and a pair of work gloves lined with soft leather. Her eyes stung. Miss Patterson had not seemed particularly warm during their one interaction, but this small kindness spoke volumes. "That was thoughtful of her," Clara managed. "She said you had been working hard and deserved something practical." Josiah shifted his weight, looking oddly uncomfortable. "I hope I didn't overstep by bringing them to you." "No, not at all. Thank you for carrying them." Clara looked down at the gifts, then up at Josiah. "Mr. Lawson, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you so different from the other men here?" The question seemed to startle him. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "My mother raised me and my sister alone after my father died. I saw how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed. I saw how men treated her, some with respect and others like she was less than human, because she was a woman alone. I learned young that there's no honor in cruelty and no strength in making someone else feel small." Clara felt something crack open in her chest, some hard shell she had built around herself. "Your mother must have been a remarkable woman." Josiah's expression softened with memory. "She passed 5 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes, reminding me to be better than my worst impulses." "And your sister?" "Married to a good man in Oregon. They have 3 children now. I visit when I can, but the mountain life suits me better than civilization most days." He smiled slightly. "Though I admit, Mrs. Henley's cooking might make me reconsider." Clara laughed, a sound that surprised her with its genuineness. "I'll be sure to tell her that." "Please do." Josiah gathered his packages. "I should let you finish your work." "Good afternoon, Miss Cole." "Good afternoon, Mr. Lawson." Clara watched him walk toward the house, his broad shoulders and easy strides so at odds with the careful gentleness in his manner. Something was shifting inside her, some long-frozen part of her heart beginning to thaw, and it frightened her even as it filled her with a hope she had thought long dead. That evening, as Clara served supper, she was conscious of Josiah's presence in a way that made her clumsy. She nearly dropped the bowl of potatoes when handing it to him, and when their fingers brushed in the exchange, she felt a jolt like touching a hot stove. "Careful," he said softly, steadying the bowl with his large hands over hers for just a moment. "I've got it." Clara retreated to the kitchen, her face burning. Mrs. Henley gave her a knowing look but said nothing. After the meal, as the boarders dispersed to their rooms or the front porch for their evening pipes, Josiah lingered in the dining room. Clara was clearing the table when he spoke. "Miss Cole, I wondered if I might ask a favor." Clara looked up surprised. "Of course, Mr. Lawson. I'm writing a letter to my sister, but my penmanship is terrible, and I want to make sure she can actually read what I'm trying to say. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you have a fine hand for writing. Would you be willing to help me? I'd pay you for your time, of course." Clara blinked. No one had ever asked for her help with such a thing before, and certainly no man had ever acknowledged her skills in such a straightforward manner. "I'd be happy to help. You don't need to pay me. Then perhaps you'd let me repay you with a small gift from the general store? I noticed your boots are wearing through." The observation was made without judgment, just a statement of fact, but Clara felt mortified that he had noticed her poverty so clearly. "Mr. Lawson, I couldn't possibly accept—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "I have the money, and it would give me peace of mind to know you have proper footwear as the weather turns cold. No one should have to worry about their boots while doing an honest day's work." Clara opened her mouth to refuse again, then closed it. She thought of her mother, who had taught her to accept help when it was offered in good faith, to recognize the difference between charity that diminished and generosity that uplifted. "Thank you," she said finally. "That's very kind. Tomorrow evening then, after supper, if you have time?" "Yes, that would be fine." Josiah smiled, and Clara felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. The next evening, after the dishes were washed and put away, Clara found Josiah waiting in the dining room with paper, ink, and a pen laid out on the table. He stood when she entered, pulling out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Thank you for doing this," he said as she settled into the seat. "I know you've been working all day." "It's no trouble." Clara arranged the writing materials and dipped the pen. "What would you like to say?" Josiah began to dictate, and Clara transcribed his words. The letter to his sister was warm and full of details about his journey to Riverton, his plans for the winter trapping season, questions about her children and her life in Oregon. But what struck Clara most was the tenderness in his words, the obvious love he held for his family. "Margaret, please tell the children that I'll send them something special from the trading post before I head back into the mountains," he continued. "I found a beautiful set of carved animals that I think young Thomas would enjoy, and there's a doll with real hair that might suit Elizabeth. Tell your husband Samuel that I appreciate him looking after you all, and that I hope his smithing business continues to thrive." Clara wrote it all down, her hand moving smoothly across the page. When she finished, she read the letter back to him, and he listened with his full attention. "That's perfect," he said when she concluded. "Your writing is beautiful, Miss Cole. Far better than anything I could manage." "I had a good teacher," Clara said. "My mother insisted I learn properly, even though my stepfather thought it was a waste of time for a girl." "Your stepfather was a fool, then." The words were matter of fact without heat, but they made Clara's breath catch. "He was many things," she said carefully. "Foolish was perhaps the least of them." Josiah was quiet for a moment. "Is he the one who hurt you?" Clara's hand went instinctively to her cheek, where the bruise had finally faded to nothing. "He was one of them. I'm sorry." The words were weighted with genuine feeling. "No one should have to live with that kind of fear." "I don't anymore," Clara said, and realized it was true. "I left, and I won't go back." "Good." Josiah leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and Clara found herself drawn into the steady regard of his gray eyes. "You deserve better than that, Miss Cole. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I hope you know that." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Josiah said quietly. "I know you work hard without complaint. I know you're kind to Mrs. Henley even when you're exhausted. I know you have talents and intelligence that you've been told don't matter. And I know that whatever you've survived to get here took more courage than most people have in their entire lives." The tears spilled over then, and Clara could not stop them. She put her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that came from some deep place she had kept locked away for years. She felt rather than saw Josiah move, heard the scrape of his chair as he stood. Then there was the soft rustle of fabric, and a large handkerchief was pressed gently into her hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with distress. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't," Clara managed, wiping at her face with the handkerchief. "I don't know why I'm crying. You said something kind, and she broke off, unable to explain the tangle of emotions in her chest. Harsh words were all you'd ever known from men, Josiah said softly, and it was not a question. And I spoke gently, and it was so unexpected you didn't know how to hold it. Clara looked up at him through her tears and found him crouched beside her chair, his large frame somehow made small and non-threatening, his expression full of a compassion that made her want to weep all over again. Yes, she whispered, that's exactly it. Josiah reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and touched her hand with just his fingertips, the lightest possible contact. Then I'll keep speaking gently, Miss Cole, until you're used to it. Until you believe that kindness is what you deserve, not cruelty, if that's all right with you. Clara turned her hand over, letting her fingers curl around his. His hand was warm and calloused from hard work, and it engulfed hers completely. I'd like that, Mr. Lawson. Josiah, he said. Please call me Josiah, Clara. Her voice was steadier now. My name is Clara. Clara. He said it like a prayer, and something shifted between them, some understanding that went beyond words. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes locked, and Clara felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. This man, this gentle giant with his quiet voice and his careful strength, was dangerous in a way she had not anticipated. He threatened the walls she had built around her heart, the conviction that she was better off alone than vulnerable to men's cruelty. But maybe, she thought as she looked into his gray eyes, maybe not all men were cruel. Maybe some were capable of the kind of tenderness that healed instead of hurt. Josiah squeezed her hand gently and then released it, standing and moving back to his chair. I should let you get some rest. You have an early morning. So do you, Clara pointed out, folding the letter carefully. Yes, but I'm used to hard work and short sleep. Mountain life teaches you to make do with less. He smiled. Though I admit sleeping in a real bed has been a luxury I'd forgotten. Clara stood, clutching his handkerchief and the letter. I'll return this to you once I've washed it. Keep it, Josiah said. I have others. Clara nodded, feeling the soft fabric between her fingers. Good night, Josiah. Good night, Clara. She walked to the kitchen on unsteady legs, her mind whirling. Mrs. Henley was sitting at the small table in the corner, working on her account books by lamplight. That man is courting you, Mrs. Henley said without looking up from her ledger. Clara nearly dropped the handkerchief. Mrs. Henley, I don't think. I've been married and widowed, girl. I know what courting looks like. Mrs. Henley set down her pen and fixed Clara with a serious look. The question is, how do you feel about it? I don't know, Clara said honestly. I've never been courted before. And I'm frightened. Of him, no. Clara sank into the chair opposite her employer. Of caring for him and having it turn out like everything else in my life. Of believing in kindness and having it revealed as a trap. Mrs. Henley nodded slowly. Those are fair fears, given what you've lived through. But Clara, you can't let your past steal your future. Not every man is like the ones who hurt you. Josiah Lawson seems like good people. He's leaving in a few weeks, Clara pointed out. Back to the mountains for the winter. Then you'll have your answer soon enough about whether he's serious in his intentions. A man who's just passing through might flirt, but he won't invest real time and care. Pay attention to his actions, not just his words. Clara thought about Josiah's careful courtesy, the way he had noticed her worn boots, how he had defended her to Samuel without making it about himself. His actions have been honorable so far. Then give him a chance, Mrs. Henley said gently. You deserve happiness, Clara. Don't talk yourself out of it before it even has a chance to begin. Over the next week, Clara found herself watching Josiah with new awareness. She noticed how he helped Mrs. Henley carry heavy supplies from the storage shed without being asked. She saw him fix a loose board on the porch steps one morning before breakfast. She observed how he treated everyone with the same quiet courtesy, from Mrs. Henley to the youngest boy who delivered firewood. But it was the small moments between them that made Clara's heart race. The way Josiah's eyes would seek her out when he entered a room, lighting up when he found her. How he always thanked her when she served his meals, making it feel like a genuine expression of gratitude rather than empty politeness. The morning he brought her a cup of coffee while she was working in the yard, saying only, "You looked like you could use this," before heading on his way. One afternoon, Clara was in the market square, running errands for Mrs. Henley, when she heard raised voices. She turned to see Samuel confronting a young native woman, his face flushed with anger. "I don't care what you say. You're not welcome here," Samuel was saying, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Your kind needs to stay on the reservation where you belong." The young woman stood her ground, but Clara could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand gripped the basket she carried. No one in the crowd was intervening, just watching with the uncomfortable fascination people had for confrontation they wanted no part of. Clara was moving before she fully decided to, stepping between Samuel and the woman. "Mr. Samuel, I believe Mrs. Henley asked you to pick up her order from the butcher shop. You're late." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you." "Nevertheless, Mrs. Henley is waiting, and she'll be displeased if her supper is delayed." Clara kept her voice level, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You should mind your business, girl," Samuel growled, but he was already backing down, aware of the watching eyes. "I am minding Mrs. Henley's business," Clara replied, "which is what she pays me to do." Samuel spat in the dust and stalked away. Clara turned to the young woman, who was regarding her with cautious surprise. "Are you all right?" Clara asked. "Yes, thank you for intervening." The woman's English was perfect, unaccented. "I'm Mary Redfeather. My husband and I have a ranch north of here, Clara Cole. I work at Mrs. Henley's boarding house." Clara glanced around at the dispersing crowd. "I'm sorry that happened." Mary smiled slightly, though it did not reach her eyes. "It happens often enough. My husband is white, and some people find that objectionable. Others simply find my existence objectionable." She adjusted her basket. "But you stood up for me when no one else would. That takes courage. Or foolishness," Clara said with a weak laugh. "I'll probably hear about it from Samuel later. If he gives you trouble, tell my husband. Jack Redfeather doesn't take kindly to bullies." Mary touched Clara's arm briefly. "Thank you again. Perhaps we'll meet in better circumstances." Clara watched her walk away, feeling the aftermath of adrenaline make her hands shake. She had just made an enemy of Samuel, but she could not bring herself to regret it. She had seen the fear beneath the woman's brave stance, had recognized in Mary something of her own experience of being targeted by men's anger. That evening, as Clara served supper, she felt Samuel's eyes on her, cold and assessing. She ignored him, focusing on her work, but tension knotted her shoulders. After the meal, as she was clearing dishes, Samuel cornered her in the hallway. "You think you're clever, embarrassing me in front of the whole town?" Clara kept her face neutral. "I was doing my job, Mr. Samuel, nothing more. Don't give me that." He stepped closer, and Clara's back hit the wall. "You've been getting above yourself since Lawson arrived, thinking you're something special because he's been sniffing around you. But you're just hired help, same as always, and you'd do well to remember your place. Step away from her." Josiah's voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable edge of command. Samuel whirled to find Josiah standing at the end of the hallway, his large frame filling the space, his expression harder than Clara had ever seen it. "This is a private conversation," Samuel said, but he had already moved back from Clara. "No, it's you intimidating a woman half your size." Josiah moved forward with deliberate slowness, and Samuel retreated step by step. "I've been patient with you, Samuel, but my patience is at an end. You will treat Miss Cole with respect or you will answer to me, and I promise you that's not a conversation you want to have." "You threatening me?" Samuel blustered, but fear flickered in his eyes. Josiah had 6 inches on him and at least 50 pounds of solid muscle. "I'm telling you how things are going to be." Josiah stopped directly in front of Samuel, and the difference in their sizes was stark. "Miss Cole has done nothing to warrant your harassment. You will leave her alone. Do we understand each other?" Samuel's jaw worked, but he nodded once, jerkily. "Good. Now I suggest you retire to your room for the evening." Samuel fled up the stairs, and Josiah turned immediately to Clara, his expression shifting from hard to concerned in an instant. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine. He just wanted to intimidate me." Clara found she was shaking again, but this time with relief rather than fear. "Thank you, again. You shouldn't have to thank me for basic decency," Josiah said, frustration clear in his voice. "You shouldn't have to live in fear of men like him." "I know." Clara met his eyes. "But I've been living in fear of men like him my whole life. It's hard to believe there's any other way to be." Josiah's expression softened. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her out the back door, into the yard where evening was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow, despite the autumn warmth in the valley. "See those mountains?" Josiah pointed to the Wind River range. "That's where I spend most of my time. Up there, the rules are different. Survival depends on respecting the land, reading the weather, knowing when to push forward and when to take shelter. There's no room for cruelty or games. Things are simpler." Clara looked at the distant peaks, trying to imagine what it would be like in that wild country. "It sounds lonely." "It can be," Josiah admitted, "but it's also peaceful. No one tells you you're worthless. No one tears you down to make themselves feel bigger. You're just a person trying to live, and the mountain doesn't care about your past or your mistakes. It only cares about whether you're strong enough and smart enough to survive." "That sounds nice," Clara said wistfully. Josiah turned to her, and in the fading light, his eyes were almost luminous. Clara, I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear me out before you respond. Can you do that? Her heart began to pound. Yes. I came to Riverton to resupply and prepare for the winter like I do every year. I expected to spend a few weeks here, keep to myself, and head back to the mountains. But then I met you, and everything changed. He took a breath, and Clara could see he was nervous. This big, capable man who faced down nature's fury without flinching. I've never been one for fancy words or games. I believe in plain speaking, so here it is. I care for you, Clara, more than I've cared for anyone in a long time. The way you've been treated makes me angry in a way I can barely express. But more than that, getting to know you these past weeks has shown me how strong you are, how kind, how much light you have in you despite everything trying to snuff it out. Clara opened her mouth, but Josiah held up a hand gently. Let me finish, please. I know I'm leaving in 2 weeks to head back to the mountains. I'll be gone until late spring, maybe 6 months or more. And I know you have no reason to trust a man who says he cares for you, given your history. But I'm asking you to consider something. Consider that what's growing between us is real. Consider that when I come back in the spring, if you're willing, I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if we find we suit each other as well as I think we will. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. Josiah, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now, he assured her. I just wanted you to know my intentions. I wanted you to understand that I'm not playing with your feelings. I'm serious about this, about you. And I want you to have the winter to think about it, without me here pressuring you or confusing things. You want me to wait for you? Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. I want you to live your life, Josiah corrected gently. I want you to keep working for Mrs. Henley, keep building a life here in Riverton. If another man courts you and you find happiness with him, I'll be glad for you, even if it hurts me. But if you think there might be something between us worth exploring, then yes, I'm asking you to wait. And I promise that when I come back, I'll do everything in my power to prove to you that I mean every word I'm saying right now. Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks again, but these were different from the tears she had shed before. These came from a place of overwhelming emotion, of hope and fear tangled together so tightly she could not separate them. I'm frightened, she whispered. I know. Josiah reached out slowly and cupped her face in his large calloused hands, his touch so gentle it made her chest ache. I'm frightened too. Caring for someone is always a risk. But Clara, some risks are worth taking. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, and felt something inside her break open completely. I never thought anyone would speak to me the way you do. I never thought I deserved it. You deserve everything good in this world, Josiah said fiercely. And I want to spend my life proving that to you, if you'll let me. Clara opened her eyes and found him looking at her with such tenderness that she felt undone by it. Kiss me, she said, barely breathing the words. Please. Josiah's eyes darkened. Are you sure? Yes. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers with a gentleness that made her melt against him. The kiss was soft, reverent, nothing like the crude advances she had endured from other men. It tasted of coffee and possibility and the kind of future she had not dared to imagine. When he pulled back, Clara was breathless and glowing. Oh, she said inadequately. Josiah smiled, and it transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. Oh, indeed. They stood together in the growing darkness, hands linked, and Clara felt the weight of years of pain begin to lift from her shoulders. She did not know what the future held, could not promise that her fear would vanish overnight. But standing here with this man who spoke gently and touched her like she was precious, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be loved. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing closeness. Josiah taught Clara how to identify different types of animal tracks in the mud by the river. Clara showed Josiah her favorite spot in Riverton, a hill overlooking the town where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching winter. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures. Mrs. Henley watched their courtship with approval, making sure to give them time together while maintaining propriety. Even the other boarders noticed the change in Clara, how she smiled more readily, how some lightness had returned to her step. Samuel kept his distance after his confrontation with Josiah. Though Clara sometimes caught him watching her with resentful eyes, she no longer cared. His opinion of her meant nothing compared to the warmth in Josiah's gaze, the security she felt in his presence. One afternoon, Josiah took Clara to the general store and bought her a new pair of sturdy boots as he had promised, along with a warm winter coat. I can't accept these, Clara protested, overwhelmed by the expense. It's too much, please, Josiah said. The winters here are harsh and I need to know you'll be warm and dry while I'm gone. Let me have this peace of mind." Mrs. Patterson, who was wrapping the purchases, smiled at them both. "He's right, dear. And besides, a man doesn't spend that kind of money on a woman unless his intentions are serious." Clara flushed but accepted the gifts, hugging the coat to her chest. "Thank you, Josiah. Thank you for letting me care for you," he replied, and the simple honesty in his voice made her heart swell. That evening, their last evening before Josiah had to leave, he asked Clara to walk with him. They went to the river where the water ran clear and cold, reflecting the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "I'm leaving at dawn," Josiah said, though they both knew it already. "I'll be heading into the high country, where there's no mail service and no way to send word until spring, I know." Clara held his hand tightly. 6 months, or longer, depending on the weather and the trapping. "But Clara, I promise you I'll come back, and when I do, I'll come straight here to you. What if something happens to you out there?" Clara's voice broke on the words. "What if you're hurt or lost or worse and I never know?" "I've been doing this for 10 years, Josiah reminded her gently. "I know how to survive in the mountains. I know when to take shelter and when to push through, and now I have something to come back to, which is more motivation than I've ever had before. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Clara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him leather and pine and something uniquely his own. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself. Keep working for Mrs. Henley, save your money, and know that you have worth beyond measure." "I promise," Clara whispered. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead and the river sang its endless song. Finally, Josiah tilted her face up and kissed her, deep and slow, pouring everything he felt into the connection between them. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara Cole. I wanted you to know that before I left." Clara felt tears stream down her face, but she was smiling through them. "I'm falling in love with you too, Josiah Lawson. Come back to me. Nothing could keep me away." The next morning, Clara stood in the yard and watched Josiah ride away on his horse, his pack loaded with supplies for the long winter ahead. He looked back once, raising his hand in farewell, and Clara waved until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Mrs. Henley came to stand beside her, putting an arm around Clara's shoulders. "He'll come back." "I know." Clara wiped at her eyes. "It's just hard, letting him go when I've only just found him. That's love, child. It's the hardest and best thing in the world." Clara nodded and turned back to the house, squaring her shoulders. She had 6 months to wait, 6 months to work and save and prove to herself that she could stand on her own. And when Josiah came back, she would be ready. The winter was long and harsh, just as Josiah had predicted. Snow came early and stayed late, drifting against the buildings and making every task twice as difficult. Clara worked tirelessly, helping Mrs. Henley keep the boarding house running through the cold months. She learned to bank fires for maximum efficiency, to cook hearty meals that would fuel working men through frigid days, to mend clothes and linens with the skill her mother had taught her years ago. She also began teaching reading and writing to 2 of the younger boarders who had never had the opportunity to learn, conducting lessons in the evening after supper. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her daily tasks, and both men proved eager students. Samuel left the boarding house in November to take a job on a ranch farther south, much to everyone's relief. Without his hostile presence, the house felt lighter, the meals more pleasant. Clara made friends in town, cautiously at first, then with more confidence. Mrs. Patterson from the general store invited her for tea one Sunday and proved to be a surprisingly warm companion once her reserve thawed. Mary Redfeather came to town occasionally, and she and Clara developed a friendship based on mutual understanding of what it meant to face prejudice and overcome it. But through it all, Clara thought of Josiah. She remembered his gentle voice, his careful strength, the way he looked at her like she mattered. Some nights she would lie in her small attic room and trace the memory of his kiss, holding it close like a talisman against the dark. Mrs. Henley watched Clara with approval as the months passed. "You're blooming," she said one evening in March, as the first signs of spring began to appear. "You stand taller now, speak with more confidence. Josiah will be pleased when he returns." "If he returns," Clara said, though her tone lacked conviction. She believed he would come back. She had to. "When?" Mrs. Henley corrected firmly. "Have faith, child." April came, and then May, and Clara began to watch the road with increasing frequency. Trappers and mountain men started appearing in town as the high country thawed, but none of them were Josiah. Clara tried not to let anxiety consume her, but it was difficult. Then, on a warm morning in late May, when the wildflowers were blooming and the river ran high with snowmelt, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard a familiar voice say her name. She spun around, and there he was. Josiah stood by the fence, looking thinner and more weathered than when he had left, his hair longer and his beard fuller, but his gray eyes were the same, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart stop. "Clara," he said again, and she was running before she consciously decided to move. She crashed into him, and his arms came around her, lifting her off her feet as he buried his face in her hair. "You came back," she sobbed against his shoulder. "You came back." "I promise," Josiah said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll always come back to you." They held each other for a long time, oblivious to Mrs. Henley watching from the kitchen window with a satisfied smile, to the curious glances of passers-by. When Josiah finally set Clara down, he cupped her face in his hands and studied her intently. "You look beautiful," he said. "Even more beautiful than I remembered, and I thought about you every single day." "You look like you've had a hard winter," Clara observed, touching the new lines around his eyes. "It was a good season for trapping, but yes, it was hard. There was a blizzard in February that lasted a week. I was snowed into my cabin and had a lot of time to think." He smiled. "Mostly about you." "I thought about you too," Clara admitted. "I was so afraid something would happen and you wouldn't come back. I'm here now." Josiah kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips in a sweet homecoming kiss that made Clara's knees weak. "And I have something to ask you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box carved with intricate designs. Opening it, he revealed a ring, simple but beautiful, a thin band of gold with a small stone the color of the sky. "Clara Cole, I've spent 6 months in the mountains thinking about nothing but you. About your courage, your kindness, your strength. About how you've overcome more than most people face in a lifetime and still managed to keep your heart open to the possibility of love. I want to spend my life treating you the way you deserve to be treated, speaking to you gently, loving you fiercely, and building a future together. Will you marry me?" Clara looked at the ring, then at Josiah's face, and saw nothing but sincerity and love in his expression. All her fears, all her doubts, fell away in the face of that absolute certainty. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." Josiah slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he picked her up again and spun her in a circle, both of them laughing like children. Mrs. Henley emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "I assume congratulations are in order?" She said. "Yes," Josiah announced, his face split by a grin that transformed him. "Well, it's about time," Mrs. Henley said, but she was smiling. "You're a good man, Josiah Lawson, and Clara deserves the best. I expect you'll treat her right." "I intend to spend every day for the rest of my life doing exactly that, madam." "Good. Now come inside, both of you. You must be hungry, Josiah, and we have much to discuss. Weddings don't plan themselves." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Josiah and Clara decided to have a simple ceremony at the church in Riverton, with Mrs. Henley and a few close friends in attendance. Josiah sold his winter's worth of furs for a substantial sum, and he and Clara began making plans for their future. "I have enough saved to buy some land," Josiah told Clara one evening as they sat together on the porch. "There's a valley about 10 miles north of here. Good water and timber, suitable for building a home. It's far enough from town to have peace and privacy, but close enough that you won't be isolated, especially in winter." "You want to stop trapping?" Clara asked, surprised. "Not entirely, but I want to scale back. Maybe do shorter trips, a few weeks at a time instead of months. I want to raise horses, build a life that has space for a family." He took her hand. "I want to build that life with you, Clara." Clara felt warmth flood through her. "A family? If you want children, yes. I know we haven't talked about it, but I'd like to have them someday if you're willing. A couple of sons, maybe a daughter or two. Teach them to respect the land, to treat people with kindness, to be better than the generation before them." "I'd like that," Clara said softly. She thought of her own difficult childhood and imagined giving children the kind of love and security she had never had. "I'd like that very much." Josiah kissed her temple. "Then that's what we'll do. Build a home, raise a family, grow old together." It sounded like a dream, but Clara was learning to believe in dreams again. The wedding took place on a sunny day in mid-June, with wildflowers decorating the small church and birdsong filling the air. Clara wore a simple dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Mary Redfeather had gathered for her that morning. As Clara walked down the aisle toward where Josiah stood waiting, she thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been living in fear, believing that harsh words and cruel treatment were all she deserved from men. Now she was walking toward a man who had shown her that gentleness and strength could exist in the same person, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Josiah watched her approach with such open adoration that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. When she reached him, he took her hands in his and squeezed gently. The ceremony was short and sweet, the pastor speaking about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Josiah spoke first. "Clara, I promise to cherish you, to speak to you gently, to protect you when you need protection, and to stand beside you when you need partnership. I promise to build a home with you that is filled with laughter and love, where harsh words have no place and kindness is the foundation of everything we do. I promise to love you fiercely and tenderly for all the days of my life." Clara's voice trembled as she replied, "Josiah, I promise to trust you with my heart, to believe in the goodness you've shown me, and to build a future where we both can thrive. I promise to be your partner, your companion, your greatest supporter. I promise to love you with all that I am, for all that you are, for the rest of our lives. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor said. "Josiah, you may kiss your bride." Josiah cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her with such sweetness that the small gathering of friends burst into applause. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the gesture. And when they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. They celebrated with a simple meal at Mrs. Henley's boarding house, surrounded by the friends Clara had made over the past year. Mrs. Patterson gave them a set of dishes, practical and pretty. Mary and Jack Redfeather brought a beautiful quilt that Mary had made. Mrs. Henley presented them with a small wooden chest filled with cooking supplies and preserves. "You've been like a daughter to me this past year," Mrs. Henley said as she hugged Clara. "I'm so happy you've found your place in the world. Thank you for giving me a chance when I had nothing," Clara replied, holding the older woman tightly. "You saved my life, Mrs. Henley. You saved your own life by having the courage to leave. I just gave you a place to land." As the sun set, Josiah and Clara left the boarding house and rode together to the small cabin Josiah had been staying in while preparing for the wedding. It was temporary shelter until they could build their own home, but it was cozy and private, and Clara felt a flutter of nervous anticipation as they approached. Josiah helped her down from the horse and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh. "It's not much," he said as he set her down, "but it's ours for now." "It's perfect," Clara assured him, looking around at the single room with its fireplace and bed and simple furnishings. They stood awkwardly for a moment, the weight of expectations and new roles settling over them. Then Josiah reached out and took Clara's hand. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. "A little," Clara admitted. "I've never been with a man before. We'll take things slow," Josiah promised. "There's no rush, Clara. We have the rest of our lives." He led her to sit on the edge of the bed and simply held her for a while, letting the tension ease out of her shoulders. Then he began to kiss her, soft, gentle kisses that gradually deepened as Clara relaxed into them. His hands were patient and careful, always giving her time to adjust, to consent, to participate. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that made Clara weep with joy. Josiah was gentle and attentive, murmuring words of love and praise, making sure she felt cherished and safe. And when it was over, he held her close and stroked her hair while she drifted into sleep in his arms, feeling more protected and loved than she ever had in her life. The next few months were a blur of hard work and happiness as Josiah and Clara began building their new life together. Josiah purchased the land he had mentioned, and they set about constructing a house with the help of friends from town. It was a simple structure, 2 rooms that would eventually expand into more, but it had a solid foundation and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. Clara discovered that she loved the work of building a homestead. She learned to maintain a vegetable garden, to preserve food for the winter, to care for the chickens Josiah bought. She turned the cabin into a home, sewing curtains and cushions, arranging furniture, creating a space that felt welcoming and peaceful. Josiah proved to be exactly the man he had promised to be. He consulted Clara on every decision, valued her opinions, and never raised his voice in anger. When disagreements arose, as they inevitably did, he approached them with patience and a willingness to compromise. He spoke to her gently always, even when he was tired or frustrated, and Clara felt herself bloom under his constant affection and respect. In September, almost exactly a year after Clara had first arrived in Riverton, she realized she was pregnant. She told Josiah one evening as they sat on their porch, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up carefully, and spun her in a slow circle before setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I can't wait to meet you." Clara laughed and cried and ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with emotion. "We're going to be parents. You're going to be an amazing mother," Josiah said, looking up at her with absolute conviction. "Our child is so lucky to have you. Our child is lucky to have both of us," Clara corrected. The pregnancy was not easy, especially as winter set in and Clara's body changed in ways that sometimes frightened her. But Josiah was there for every moment, rubbing her aching back, bringing her tea when she felt nauseous, reading to her in the evenings while she rested. He cut back his trapping even more, only going out for a few days at a time so he would never be far if she needed him. In April 1878, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy after a long and difficult labor. Josiah stayed by her side through it all, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, speaking words of encouragement when she thought she could not go on. When the midwife finally placed the baby in Clara's arms and she looked down at his tiny face, she felt a love so profound it took her breath away. Josiah, sitting on the bed beside her, wrapped his arm around them both and looked at his son with tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Josiah whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at her son, Clara knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas, after his grandmother." Josiah blinked in surprise. "My mother? She raised you to be the man you are," Clara said. "She taught you kindness and respect. I want to honor her, and I want our son to know the legacy he comes from." Josiah kissed Clara's forehead, then bent to press a gentle kiss to Thomas's head. "Thomas Lawson, it's perfect." The months that followed were exhausting but filled with joy. Clara and Josiah navigated the challenges of new parenthood together, taking turns walking the floor with a fussy baby, marveling at every small development, supporting each other through the hard days and celebrating the good ones. Clara discovered that motherhood naturally to her, perhaps because she was so determined to give Thomas everything she had never had. She spoke to him constantly in a gentle, loving voice. She held him close and showed him affection freely. She vowed that he would never know the harsh words and cruel treatment that had marked her own childhood. Josiah was a devoted father, patient and playful with his son. Clara often found him holding Thomas and talking to him about the land, the animals, the changing seasons, as if the baby could understand every word. And perhaps he could in his own way, because Thomas thrived under his parents' love. As Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, Clara and Josiah's home became a place of laughter and warmth. They hosted dinners for their friends, welcomed visitors, and gradually became pillars of the small community around Riverton. Clara's courage in standing up to Samuel and defending Mary Redfeather had not been forgotten, and other women began to seek her out for advice and friendship. Mrs. Henley visited often, delighted with her honorary grandmother role. Mrs. Patterson and Mary Redfeather became regular fixtures at the Lawson home, forming a circle of strong women who supported each other. When Thomas was 2 years old, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in late winter of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Margaret after Josiah's sister, and the little girl had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. Josiah handled having a daughter with the same tender care he had shown Thomas, but Clara noticed a special softness in him when he held Margaret. "I want her to grow up knowing she's valued," he told Clara one evening, cradling the sleeping infant. "I want her to never doubt her worth, to never accept harsh words from anyone." "She won't," Clara assured him. "She has you to show her what good men are like. She'll never settle for less." 2 years later, another son joined the family, whom they named Robert, and 2 years after that, a second daughter arrived, named Sarah. Their home, which they had expanded twice, was full of children's laughter, of muddy footprints and scraped knees and bedtime stories. Clara sometimes looked around at her life and could hardly believe it was real. She had 4 healthy children who knew nothing but love and security. She had a husband who treated her with respect and affection every single day. She had friends and community and a place in the world that felt solid and true. One evening, when the children were all tucked into bed and she and Josiah sat on the porch watching the stars, Clara spoke what was in her heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said quietly. "When I came to Riverton 7 years ago, I was running from everything painful in my life. I thought harsh words were all I deserved from men. I thought I would spend my life making myself small and invisible, just trying to survive." Josiah took her hand, his large fingers threading through hers. "And now I know what it means to be loved, to be cherished, to be treated gently." Clara turned to look at him, this mountain man who had seen something worth protecting in a scared, bruised woman. "You saved me, Josiah. You showed me that not all men are cruel, that I deserved kindness." "You saved yourself, Clara," Josiah said, his voice gentle as always. "You had the courage to leave your old life and build a new one. You had the strength to let yourself trust again, to open your heart despite everything that had hurt you. I'm just grateful you chose to open it to me." Clara leaned against him, resting her head on his broad shoulder. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I know the feeling. Josiah kissed the top of her head. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You and our children are my whole world, Clara. Every good thing in my life traces back to the day I walked into Mrs. Henley's boarding house and saw you scrubbing those steps. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the mountain valley they called home. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. The vegetable garden Clara had planted that spring was flourishing. The horses in the corral shifted and nickered softly to each other. Everything was as it should be. Do you ever regret giving up the full-time trapping life? Clara asked after a while. Never, Josiah said immediately. I still go out for short trips, and that's enough. Coming home to you and the children, building this life together, it's worth more than all the furs in the Rocky Mountains. Good, Clara smiled against his shoulder. Because I don't think I could manage 4 children on my own for months at a time. Josiah laughed, a deep rumble that Clara felt through his chest. You could manage anything you set your mind to. But thankfully you don't have to. We're partners, Clara. In everything. Partners, Clara echoed, savoring the word. It was so different from what she had seen in her stepfather's house, where her mother had been treated as property, or in the harsh interactions she had witnessed between men and women before Josiah. Partnership implied equality, mutual respect, shared goals, and responsibilities. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas proved to be thoughtful and studious, with his father's quiet nature and his mother's love of learning. Margaret was spirited and bold, never afraid to speak her mind or stand up for what she believed was right. Robert was gentle and artistic, always drawing or carving something new. Sarah was the youngest and perhaps most like Clara, observant and empathetic, seeming to sense when others were hurting and offering comfort. Josiah taught all the children to ride and hunt, to read the weather and respect the wilderness. Clara taught them to read and write, to cook and garden, to treat all people with dignity regardless of their station or background. Together they raised children who were confident but not arrogant, strong but not cruel. When Thomas was 15, a young man from town made a disparaging remark about a girl he was interested in, saying she was too plain to be particular. Clara watched her son's face harden, saw him step forward with his father's protective stance. That's no way to speak about anyone, Thomas said, his voice quiet but firm. You ought to apologize, the young man laughed. Why would I apologize for telling the truth? Because it's not true, and even if it were, her appearance is none of your business. Thomas crossed his arms, and Clara saw so much of Josiah in that moment she felt her heart squeeze. My father taught me that a person's worth isn't determined by their looks, and that men who tear others down are showing their own weakness, not anyone else's flaws. The young man backed down, muttering, and Thomas walked away with his head high. When he returned home that evening, he told his parents what had happened. Josiah clapped his son on the shoulder, pride evident in his expression. You did right, Thomas. You stood up for someone who needed defending. I just remembered what you always taught me, Thomas said. That harsh words from men are a choice, not an inevitability. That we can choose to be better. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Her children would never know the fear she had grown up with, the belief that cruelty was simply the way of things. They would carry forward the lessons Josiah had taught them, spreading kindness into the next generation. As the children grew older and began to make lives of their own, Clara and Josiah found themselves with more time together. Thomas went to work for the territorial government, using his education to help write fair laws. Margaret married a rancher who treated her as an equal partner, and they built a thriving operation together. Robert became a teacher, using his gentle nature to help children learn and grow. Sarah, the youngest, surprised everyone by studying medicine, determined to bring healing to the mountain communities. Through it all, Clara and Josiah remained each other's anchor. They still sat on the porch most evenings, talking about their day, making plans, simply enjoying each other's presence. Josiah's hair went gray at the temples, and Clara's face showed lines from years of laughter and occasional worry. But they looked at each other with the same love that had brought them together all those years ago. One summer evening, when they had been married for 25 years, Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Josiah work with the horses in the corral. His movements were still strong and sure, though he no longer had quite the same endurance he had possessed in his youth. She thought about the man she had first seen riding into Mrs. Henley's yard, how she had been too afraid to even look him in the eye. She thought about that first supper, when he had thanked her for the meal with such simple sincerity. How she had wept later, overwhelmed by the novelty of gentle words from a man. She thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, word by word, moment by moment. A life founded on respect and trust, and the kind of love that deepened with time rather than fading. Josiah looked up and saw her watching. Even from a distance, she saw his face light up with the smile he reserved just for her. He raised his hand in a wave, and Clara waved back, her heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. Later, as they prepared for bed, Josiah pulled Clara into his arms and held her close. "What were you thinking about this evening? You had a faraway look." "I was thinking about us," Clara said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "About how far we've come." "We've built something good," Josiah agreed. "We've built something more than good," Clara corrected. "We've built a legacy. Our children know how to love and be loved. They know that harsh words are not inevitable, that gentleness is strength, not weakness. They'll teach their children the same, and on it will go." Josiah tightened his embrace. "Because you had the courage to accept kindness when it was offered. Because you didn't let your past define your future. Because you showed me that a different future was possible," Clara replied. "Because you spoke gently when all I had known were harsh words." They stood together in the quiet of their bedroom, holding each other, and Clara felt complete contentment wash over her. The scared, bruised young woman who had stumbled into Riverton 25 years ago had found not just safety but love, not just survival but a life of purpose and joy. "I would choose you again," Clara said softly. "In every lifetime, in every circumstance, I would choose you." "And I would choose you," Josiah replied, his voice rough with emotion. Every time, without hesitation, forever. They made love that night with the familiarity of long years together, but also with the tenderness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Afterward, as Clara drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected gift of this life, this love, this man who had taught her that she was worthy of gentleness. The years continued their steady march. Clara and Josiah became grandparents many times over, welcoming their children's children with the same love and patience they had shown their own. Their home remained a gathering place, filled with multiple generations sharing meals and stories and laughter. Clara never forgot where she had come from, but she no longer let those memories have power over her. They were simply part of her story, the dark background that made the light of her present life shine all the brighter. She had survived harsh words and cruel treatment, and she had emerged stronger, more compassionate, more determined to spread kindness wherever she went. Josiah remained her steady partner through everything. When she occasionally had nightmares about her past, he held her until she calmed. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of her strength. When she celebrated victories, he celebrated with her. He was the answer to prayers she had been too beaten down to even voice, the proof that good men existed and that she deserved to be loved by one. As they grew old together, their love only deepened. They knew each other's rhythms, could communicate with a glance, finished each other's sentences. Their relationship was a quiet miracle, the kind that went unnoticed by most of the world but meant everything to those who lived it. One autumn evening, when the aspens had turned gold and the air carried the first hints of coming winter, Clara and Josiah sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp of mind and grateful for each new day together. "Do you remember the day we met?" Clara asked, taking Josiah's hand in hers. "Every detail," Josiah replied. "You were scrubbing the steps at Mrs. Henley's, and you couldn't even look at me. You were so scared, so beaten down by life. But even then I could see the strength in you, the light that hadn't quite been extinguished. I thought you were going to be like all the other men I had known," Clara admitted. "I was braced for harsh words, for casual cruelty. And then you spoke so gently, treated me with such respect, and I didn't know how to handle it." "I'm glad I could show you something different," Josiah said softly. "You showed me everything," Clara corrected. "You showed me that I deserved love, that harsh words were not my destiny, that there was another way to live. You gave me this life, Josiah, this beautiful, full, joyful life." "We gave it to each other," Josiah said. "We built it together, day by day, choice by choice." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so many years. The land had been witness to their love story, to the family they had raised, to the legacy they had created. "I love you," Clara whispered as the stars began to appear. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Josiah replied, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "From that first moment until my last breath, I will love you." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a lifetime of happiness from the ashes of pain. They had proven that harsh words did not have to be the final word, that gentleness could triumph over cruelty, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. As the years finally began to take their toll, Clara and Josiah faced the reality of their mortality with the same partnership that had defined their marriage. When Josiah's health began to fail in his late 70s, Clara cared for him with tireless devotion. And when Clara's own strength began to wane, Josiah did the same for her, their children and grandchildren surrounding them with love and support. They passed within months of each other, Josiah first and Clara following, unable to bear a world without her beloved partner. They were laid to rest, side by side on a hill overlooking the valley they had loved, under the vast Montana sky where they had built their dreams. At the funeral, their children and grandchildren gathered to remember and celebrate lives well lived. Thomas spoke of his father's quiet strength and his mother's resilience. Margaret told stories of the love that had filled their home, the example their parents had set. Robert shared how their gentle guidance had shaped his own approach to teaching. Sarah spoke of her mother's journey from fear to freedom, how it had inspired her own determination to help others heal. The grandchildren added their own memories, painting a picture of a couple who had loved deeply and lived fully, who had created a family founded on respect and kindness, who had shown by example that a better way was always possible. As the family gathered for a meal after the service, sharing stories and laughter through tears, it was clear that Clara and Josiah's legacy would live on. Their children had learned to treat others with gentleness. Their grandchildren were growing up knowing they were valued and loved. The ripple effect of one man choosing to speak kindly to a wounded woman would continue through generations. Years later, Thomas's own granddaughter would write a book about her great-grandparents, telling the story of Clara Cole and Josiah Lawson for a wider audience. She wrote about harsh words and gentle responses, about finding love in unexpected places, about the courage it takes to believe in kindness when cruelty is all you have known. The book became a reminder that every person has a story, that behind every guarded expression might be a heart yearning for gentleness, that small acts of kindness can change the entire course of a life. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this world, Clara and Josiah were together still, holding hands as they had done in life, their love an eternal testament to the transforming power of choosing tenderness over harshness, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair. Their story was simple in its way. A broken woman and a good man, meeting at the right moment, building a life together one gentle word at a time. But simple does not mean easy, and their love had been hard-won, carefully tended, fiercely protected. It was the kind of love that proved impossible things were possible, that people could change and grow and heal, that the scars of the past did not have to determine the shape of the future, that sometimes, just sometimes, the world offered up exactly what was needed when it was needed most. Clara had known nothing but harsh words from men until the mountain man spoke so gently she wept at supper. And from those tears had grown a love that spanned decades, a family that numbered in the dozens, a legacy that would outlive them both by generations. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. And in the end, as they had sat together on countless evenings watching the sun set over the mountains they loved, that was all they had ever wanted. Each other, a life built on kindness, and the knowledge that love, true love, was the most powerful force in the world. They had proven it every day of their lives together, from that first gentle word to their last breath. And their story would live on, a beacon for anyone who had known harsh words and dared to hope for something better, a reminder that gentleness could triumph, that love could heal, and that every person deserved to be spoken to with respect, compassion, and tender care. The end came peacefully for both of them, surrounded by family, held in love, and grateful for every moment they had been given together. Clara's last words were to Josiah, whispered in the quiet of their room with their children keeping vigil nearby. "Thank you for teaching me what love is." And Josiah, in his final moments, looked at his beloved wife and said with the same gentle conviction he had shown throughout their life together, "Thank you for letting me love you." It was the perfect ending to a love story that had begun with a scared young woman and a kind mountain man, and it proved what they had always known, that speaking gently was not weakness but strength, that choosing kindness was not foolishness but wisdom, and that love, real and true and tender, was worth every risk, every fear, every tear. Their children made sure their parents' graves were well tended, planting wildflowers that bloomed every spring in a riot of color. Visitors to the cemetery often paused at the double headstone, reading the simple inscription, Clara Cole Lawson, 1854-1933, Josiah Lawson, 1851-1933, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents. They taught us that love speaks gently, and those who knew the story would stand there for a moment, remembering, and perhaps resolving to be a little kinder in their own lives, to speak a little more gently, to remember that every person they met might be carrying wounds that only tenderness could heal. That was the legacy of Clara and Josiah Lawson. Not just the family they raised or the land they tended, but the reminder that harsh words did not have to be the final word, that mountain men could speak gently, and that love, when given freely and received with courage, could transform everything. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring power of choosing kindness, of believing in the possibility of love even after heartbreak, and of the revolutionary act of treating another human being with gentle respect. And so the tale of the woman who had known only harsh words and the mountain man who showed her a different way became more than just their story. It became a promise that better was possible, that healing could happen, that love was always worth the risk. In the end, that was their gift to the world, hope embodied in the life they built together, one gentle word at a time.